She said, no, let me go. Put her hands up. I kept striking her, and she lost consciousness, and I kept striking her till ensure she was dead.
He cut off their hands. He cut off both their heads. He was a wicked, wicked person.
It was too much to even comprehend how he could be that cruel, that evil, and commit the horrific acts that he did. It makes me sick to my stomach.
It's a very densely forested area, very difficult area to search for things like blood or hair or fibers.
You can't catch me. I am here in this vastness of the United States, and it is up to you to try to find me or stop me, because I'm going to keep doing this horrific act.
Is that difficult to do, to take somebody's head off?
All you gotta do is keep sewing, sewing.
It was nothing I've ever experienced before.
Once you've taken someone, you either kill them or you get caught.
I mean, he's just pure evil. You can see it in his eyes.
The Appalachian Trail is a collection of national parks covering 2,000 miles across 14 eastern U.S. states. Its vast, untamed landscape is a favorite among hikers and hunters. The southern tip of this wilderness is in North Georgia.
It's a very mountainous area. National forest land is abundant in North Georgia.
We have lots of small towns in Georgia, usually 20, 30 miles apart, but in between those cities are just remote, rugged mountains.
You can walk for literally days and not come across a road. If someone disposes of a body in a national forest, you'll never find them.
Fulton County, Georgia, is where divorcee Gary Hilton spends his time away from work.
My name is John Tabor. I own a telemarketing operation. And I first met Gary Hilton when he replied to a help wanted ad for telemarketers. He was very fond of the outdoors and enjoyed taking his dog out into the national forests where they would camp for maybe a week at a time. Had proved himself to be a reliable and valuable employee. He was a smart individual. He was great with numbers. He could do rather complex mathematics in his head and spit numbers out that most people couldn't do. It was a fine working arrangement. He did his job, and that was pretty much it. He never got along that well with other people and just seemed to prefer the company of his dog rather than other humans. He worked in that office uneventfully for a decade. Construction companies in general, mine included, were hit hard, where there was a dramatic drop in business. So I shut the phone room down, and he was very concerned about that. He suggested that he do his own marketing on my behalf, and then I could just pay him commissions based on his production. So Gary and I came to an agreement where he would actually live at the office so we could keep an eye on things since I really didn't have any need to go to that location. So it seemed like a win-win situation. He wasn't being very productive. Based on his long history, I would advance him money for his living expenses and whatnot, with the understanding that eventually we would catch up. I got frustrated at some point. It just became obvious that he had lost interest in actually working. At some point, you have to put your foot down And then suddenly, within a matter of a few weeks, he became extremely distant and belligerent, and it got to the point where he demanded money. It was shocking to me that he would actually do such a thing and take that position. I realized at that point that this is a real problem. The situation just spiraled downward rapidly. It didn't make any sense.
At this point, despite their long working relationship, John knows very little about Hilton's past. He had a traumatic start to life. As a child, his parents moved around a lot, and at age 13, he shot his stepfather.
When we look at a 13-year-old child who deliberately picks up a rifle and shoots his stepfather out of frustration, out of rage or whatever, that is a bright red warning sign that this is somebody who, when they are angry enough, is willing to do something like that.
His early childhood featured another traumatic incident. At age 9, he suffered a brain injury.
He had been hit in the frontal lobe with a Murphy bed, had fallen on him when he was a young kid.
It is a very serious injury. He has over 200 stitches. And several people in the hospital report that he becomes very hyperactive. While he's in the hospital, they have difficulty kind of controlling him. And when we look at serial killers, it's interesting that about a quarter of them have a history of head trauma at some point in their life, which can damage their frontal lobe. It can lead to problems with judgment, decision-making, and all kinds of things.
At age 18, Gary enlisted in the U.S. Army as a paratrooper. But after 3 years, he had a schizophrenic episode and was discharged.
He drifts around during the 70s, during the 1980s. He has 3 failed marriages. He kind of goes from job to job. He is somebody who is really living on the fringes of society.
Here's someone that's saying my look is going to present that, my appearance, my whole genre of who I am is going to say, stay away from me, I'm different from you, I don't want to be a part of this society.
I had to satisfy my own curiosity as to what was going on with this man. So I decided to stop by the office unannounced. So I pulled into the parking lot. There were no lights on in the office. Parking area was dark. It was just dark everywhere. The back door was wide open, which was also unusual. The whole situation was just creepy. I just had this feeling of doom. Nothing seemed right. Everything seemed out of order. I remember reaching to turn light switches on, but none of the lights would come on. And then suddenly, he pops out of a doorway. So I immediately noticed that he was much more disheveled than normal. And at that point, he smiled at me, and I noticed that several of his teeth were missing. And I was pretty shocked by that. I just said, "What happened to you?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, my teeth." He goes, he said, "I pulled them out with this pair of pliers." Okay. He said, "Yeah," he said, "he did it so it would frighten people when they looked at him." Wow. I knew at that point I needed to get the hell out of there as soon as I could. I just felt like something bad could happen at any moment.
Around this period of time, we see this kind of erratic aggression appear, and he seems to be getting some enjoyment out of that. Several people have reported being afraid of him at these national parks. He is enjoying being menacing. And I think what that is reflecting is this increased agitation he's experiencing, this increased anger, and this increased violence risk. He is ramping up the more he does these kind of things, the more he changes his appearance, the more he talks about liking the fact that he's scaring people. I mean, those are things that really do tell us. They're like little red flags on this path to violence.
With the goodwill of John Tabor now wearing thin, Gary Hilton makes a stark demand for $3,000.
I kind of laughed when he first made the demand. It was only after he followed up with that and said, "Well, John, you've got a great life, beautiful wife, this beautiful young son. It would be such a shame for you to lose all that. I just knew that something bad was going to happen and probably would be sooner than later.
Gary Hilton has threatened to harm the family of his former boss, John Tabor, unless he hands over $3,000. Terrified, John has moved his family away.
But that was my first move. Get them out of the house, someplace where he had no idea where they were. I agreed to write this check for him. I told him I would put it by the front door of my house and he would come get it. Hilton came out of the woods, out of nowhere, at exactly the same time as I was walking down the driveway. So we literally were now facing each other, and all I could remember thinking at that point was, wow, I wish I had on a bulletproof vest and a firearm right now. I felt incredibly vulnerable. I knew at that moment I needed to get inside that front door of my house as quickly as possible because I had a Glock 9mm positioned close to the front door. I dropped my belongings on the floor, got my firearm, chambered the round, and came right back out the front door with the gun pointing in the direction he was in. He was now maybe 100 feet away, and he was fleeing back off into the woods. I believe that one of us was going to end up dead.
After this terrifying encounter, Gary Hilton stops living at John's office and appears to vanish. Months later, police encounter him on private land on the Appalachian Trail.
What you doing out here? You know, I just wanted a place to camp because I'm on my way leaving. As a matter of fact, I'm getting my maps together.
His emotions kind of vacillate all over the place.
Okay. And I camped out here 20 years ago. I can show you.
And in fact, he ends up at one point saying, "Hey, I love you."
Hey, I love you. Mr. Hilton, take care. Be safe.
Which again shows how this person is kind of losing control, I think, not only of their thought processes, but their emotions.
If there's deer hunters around there, I can be wearing a purple shirt, that red backpack.
He seems to have no awareness of how he's coming across to the other person. And that also is a hallmark of deterioration. When somebody loses the ability to self-reflect and realize and change their behavior when they're saying things that are inappropriate or don't make sense.
No, they're crazy, man. I'm telling you, they're crazy.
The forests as they are remote locations throughout the United States, but they bring leisure to most people, but sadly can be an opportunity for those looking for horrific activities, criminal activities to take place.
John and Irene Bryant were in their late 70s, early 80s. They were experienced hikers. In fact, John Bryant was what is called a through hiker of the Appalachian Trail. That means he's traveled the complete distance of the trail from Georgia to Maine. The Pisgah National Forest is extremely remote, consists of several thousand acres of forest land. They went into the forest and parked their car. And very soon, they were confronted by Gary Hilton. Gary Hilton immediately killed Irene. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head.
John Bryant was taken, held captive in the back of Hilton's van. He chained him around the neck and padlocked the chain.
And takes him to another park, and then he kills him, uses his bank card, and gets $300. And that is what he gets in exchange for, you know, just a beautiful couple's life.
When the authorities began to search for John and Irene, they found the body of Irene, but no signs of John, other than the ATM activity. And it was later on that John's body was found in the Nantahala National Forest.
It was determined that he was murdered with a handgun, shot in the head, and left at a different location within the National Forest.
A natural reaction is, wow, this was a horrific thing that I did. But then I think there's a reality that sets in, but I'm getting away with it. And if that urge pulls at me to do it again, you certainly can see the logic to say, I can ease my tension by doing it again, which allows for what we now see as serial killers taking place.
My name is Gloria Tucker. I live in Tallahassee, Florida. My cousin was Cheryl Dunlap, which I refer to her as Sherry all the time. Oh, I loved her immensely. I loved Sherry to pieces. She was such a kind person.
She went for a day hike in the Apalachicola National Forest in an area called Leon Sinks. It's very much like any other national forest. There's hiking trails, creeks, and just a very nice area to spend time.
It was a calm place, she thought, a nice place, a beautiful place. And she just kind of contemplated and read a little book, and then she was kidnapped. He tied her to a tree at first, and then he drove to Tallahassee to the bank. He had taped his face up. I think it was 2 or 3 times he got money out of her account. He kept her there alive for 2 or 3 days. He made her march over to a tree to tie herself up, and as she was going, he pulled the gun and shot her in the head.
I think money can be a factor involved, but control is another. Taking someone's life is the ultimate control over someone.
It tells us a lot about Gary Hilton in terms of how he views his victims, essentially as objects that he's got to now figure out how to, disguise and get rid of. He isn't necessarily seeing this person as a person at this point. So it doesn't mean he's getting satisfaction, but it does mean that this is somebody who we're thinking, where are the limits in terms of what this person would do?
Some hunters in the forest saw some buzzards circling an area and went over and found the remains of Cheryl. Her head had been removed as well as her hands, but they were able to identify her through some DNA.
With 400 miles between murders, police in Florida and police in North Carolina are unaware they're dealing with a serial killer. But Hilton's next victim would fight back.
In our world, she's the hero in this case.
She kept fighting.
She almost beat him. She almost got the best of him.
Meredith Emerson was the All-American girl. Very bright, very brave, had recently graduated from the University of Georgia. She lived at the time in the northern suburb of Atlanta. She was a very experienced hiker. She had hiked those mountains out in Colorado, so, these mountains out here really can't compare to those. Blood Mountain is actually the highest peak in Georgia that the Appalachian Trail crosses.
There is a lot of hikers come to this area. Although there's not a heavy populated area here, it's certainly a heavy trafficked area during the daytime. So Gary Hilton was very bold to choose this spot.
All she's doing is a New Year's Day, taking a hike with her dog.
Gary sat up in the woods and surveyed the parking lot and made the decision on who he was going to abduct.
What you're looking at is upping the ante, going towards someone who is more fit, more young, but almost meeting his match.
Hilton basically saw her on the trail. She had a dog, he had a dog. He knew that he could strike up a conversation about the dogs. Eventually she said, okay, I'll talk to you later, and just basically left him. She pretty much ran up the trail, and she probably sensed that there's something wasn't good about it, and left him behind. So he concealed himself along the trail. Some people had actually seen him hiding, crouching behind the rocks.
That combination of isolation, him being out in the woods, seeing himself as a survivalist, you really start getting a sense of this kind of dehumanization and complete lack of any ability to care about anybody else.
This is the area where Meredith Emerson initially hiked up this to the trail. Gary laid in wait in this area right here for Meredith.
Gary Hilton waited on Meredith as she was coming back down the trail. He attacked her.
She turns around and she basically goes after him. She grabs his bayonet, which it just stuns him, and she absolutely puts up the fight of her life.
Boy, does she put up a battle.
I had to hand fight her. And that's where I got this hand. I probably have multiple fractures in my right hand now.
Okay.
I had to hand fight her, and I still couldn't get control of her. She would feign or pretend that I was in control and then start fighting again.
Meredith was trained in martial arts. She almost beat him up. And they rolled off the trail down into the woods, away from the trail.
The ground was so disturbed in that area, you could tell it was a very violent fight that had taken place right there. He finally got control over her by convincing her he had a gun.
So I zip tied her to a tree, and I knew that I had to go and clean the crime scene. Okay. I was aware that I dropped all that stuff and her stuff.
When Meredith Emerson doesn't return from walking her dog, her boyfriend reports her missing.
We blast out a picture of Meredith and her dog. The very first thing I did, I checked her phone records and her bank records. The bank had reported to us that her bank account had not been attempted to be used. I feel confident that in Meredith's mind, she was doing that in hopes that we would be able to track her and be able to find her sooner.
The idea of not giving the full PIN number allows for more opportunities to get away from this situation.
Let me ask you one quick question. Did she ever give you her PIN number while you were asking for it on the mountain?
Yeah. After I got control of her around the side, she gave me a PIN number.
Okay.
It was incorrect.
Okay.
She never gave me a correct PIN number.
With police unaware that Meredith's card is being used, Hilton's abuse escalates.
And I told her, honey, I told you I was going to let you go. You've run me all over North Georgia. Made me put 150 miles on my van. We still don't. You've lied to me. You've run me around. Give me some.
His explanation for why he raped Meredith is because he says that she owed him that because she gave him the runaround about the PIN number.
She showed conniving instinct. She was able to fight off him and be a little smarter than him. Sadly, the rape part of it was an added penalty for how much she showed to fight off this horrible act.
And so I think that's very interesting to think about that. What does that mean? The fact that, in his head, this is how he's justifying the rape. So I don't think that sex was a primary motive for him, but I definitely think, he definitely has some issues in those respects.
We set up a command post at the Vogel State Park, which is right there at the base of the mountain. When we discovered her water bottles and her backpack and some of her effects at the trail, we felt like something bad had happened. There was also a police baton found in the area. That was concerning for us. So a lot of what we were doing was making phone calls, trying to identify anyone who may have seen anything.
There were so many people that had contacted the tip line and said, there's a strange guy that was on the trail that day. They all describe him almost identical, older gentleman, very fit, wearing high-end hiking gear, but he has duct tape on his shoes. He's got a dog with him, and they saw him around a white van.
Police investigating the John and Irene Bryant murders in North Carolina and the separate force investigating the Cheryl Dunlap murder in Florida soon contact the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, who are running the Meredith Emerson case.
When we learned of those cases, then we began to talk to both jurisdictions about the similarities, and there were several.
The U.S. Marshal Service offered their assistance. We basically gave them all of the information for Meredith, all the information for Gary Hilton, and they ran them through their system, and they basically came back and said, you know, her card was somebody attempted to use her card at this location, and this location on the 1st and the 2nd. And I said, no, the bank's not telling me that. The bank should have known that her PIN and her card was used, yet no money was taken out.
The photographs of the person walking up to the ATM was very, very similar. And then when we got our photographs from our ATMs, there was no doubt that it was the same person. There was mention of a van in Florida where Gary Hilton was actually confronted with a park ranger. We had a van in our case, so everything began to line up fairly quickly as soon as we found out of both of those jurisdictions.
I think he had been pretty self-assured up until now. I think he really did in his mind convince himself that he was going to continue along the path. Nothing bad was going to happen. And I think this does start the beginning of the end for Gary Hilton.
Gary Hilton has been holding Meredith hostage for 2 days. 60 miles south of Blood Mountain, Hilton's former boss, John Tabor, hasn't heard from him in over 7 months.
I still remained armed with my pistol on my person and my assault rifle in my vehicle. I would still have someone sweep the woods, if you will, do a quick walkthrough, make sure he wasn't there before I drove home at night. I never felt completely comfortable, so that's why I remained armed 24/7. My home gym is actually where I was when I first heard about it. And I was working out and caught the top of the news where they broke to cover this case of the missing girl up in North Georgia. They said that there was evidence of a struggle in the parking lot where they found Meredith's vehicle. But what really got my attention was they said they found an expendable police baton. That's what really made me stop in my tracks. And now I'm just staring at the television going, oh, wait a minute, did I just hear expendable police baton? Because that's something that I knew Hilton had with him all the time. So when I heard that, I just remember just going numb, thinking, wow, I knew it was something I had to do. So I called and I ended up getting, I guess it was the Union County Sheriff's Department on the phone.
And says, I know who you're talking about. His name's Gary Michael Hilton. I can give you the number, the tag number to the van because I bought it for him. People had heard him yelling at the dog and said they thought he was saying Danny. And he actually said, no, his dog's name's Dandy. So we knew we were probably talking about the right guy. So we pull a driver's license photo of him and put it out onto the news media. So it carries nationwide again.
Maybe 6 hours after I made that phone call, I was trying to wrap up some business before heading to Colorado for vacation. And this is the part that still stuns me today. My phone rang. I answered the phone like normal, and it was him. After 7 months of absolutely no communication, there he was on the phone with me. Out of nowhere, like a ghost. If there was anything I was afraid of, it was not being able to fight back. That was my fear. Fight to the death, bring it on. I'm ready.
Gary Hilton has been holding Meredith Emerson hostage since New Year's Day. She's refusing to give him her bank PIN number, and he's desperate for money. So he's traveling to his former boss's house, where he hopes to pick up a check, and calls him on the way. The last time the pair spoke, Gary Hilton threatened John's family.
I'm just sitting in my car in a state of disbelief. He immediately apologized for what had happened and told me that he wanted to come back to work.
And I was really sincere in trying to start work again for him because I saw that this robber wasn't getting it because I hadn't gotten any money off her.
But I played along. I acted as though I didn't know anything about anything. And he said he needed some money to get started, you know, to get back to work and whatnot. And I said, hey, that's no problem. How much do you need? We discussed an amount, $700, $800, I forgot what it was. But I said, yeah, I'll be more than happy to give you the check. I said, well, where are you? Because I was ready to get this over with, one way or the other. But then he explained, he just said that that's not possible. He could not meet me then under any circumstances, but within the next couple of days, he would come get the check from the office, and that was it.
Once we learned that there was a possibility that Hilton would go to his former employer's office to pick up the check, we got with the local jurisdiction, and they deployed their SWAT team, and they were prepared to grab him if he showed up. And we were hoping that he would, because if he showed up, most likely he'd have Meredith with him. But he didn't show up.
I want you to tell people that when I called him, that girl was alive. She was in my van. Once you've taken someone, you either kill them or you get caught. If you release them, you're going to get caught.
I gave her a book to read and everything else there, and I walked up and made as if to unsecure the chain, struck her with the bar.
What bar?
It was a jack handle, just a straight jack handle, the solid iron bar. Struck her with that. She said, no, let me go. Put her hands up. I kept striking her. You'll see some defensive wounds to her hand.
Okay.
She lost consciousness, and I kept striking her till ensure she was dead.
After finding out everything that she did, you know, how close we came to catching him on numerous occasions, and she was still alive, to this day, breaks my heart.
I was very familiar with that area called Dawson Forest Wildlife Management Area. He had taken her head off and moved it to another location about a mile away from her body.
At this point, Gary Hilton decides to release Meredith Emerson's dog, Ella.
He seemed to have no trouble whatsoever murdering Meredith, but he cannot murder Ella. And I think that's very, very significant. It just speaks to the lack of attachment that Gary Hilton seems to have with anybody.
We got a telephone call to the tip line from a lady about 60 miles south of Blood Mountain who said, I think I just saw Meredith Emerson's dog walk into a grocery store.
The video surveillance at the grocery store shows it walking around. It almost looked like it was asking for help.
We were able to pick up the dog and identify the dog as Ella through an ID chip that she had in her. So we knew that Ella was in an area 70 miles south of the abduction site. We had another call to the tip line from a lady who had known Hilton in the past, who told us he just called her asking for money. And she told us, she told Hilton, don't you know the world's looking for you? And he hung up. She called immediately, and we were able to trace that phone number to a pay telephone at a gas station just across from the grocery store where Ella had been found. So there was a lot of activity around that gas station. The agents I sent down there found a dumpster in the parking lot, and they decided to look in the dumpster. That's where we found the things that I had hoped that we wouldn't. We found bloody clothing. We found Meredith's driver's license and wallet. We found other clothing, men's clothing with blood on them. This was so much blood that you could wring it out.
The blood was wet, it was fresh. That was disturbing, because up to this point, we were all holding out the hope that Meredith's alive. We're gonna capture the bad guy and recover her.
Based on what we'd found in the dumpster, none of us really thought that someone could survive and lose that much blood.
He goes to another convenience store at that location or down near that location and tries to clean more stuff out of his van. Basically everything that had blood on it or he thought had blood on it or anything that could tie him to Meredith.
And it wasn't that long until a citizen called 911 and said, I think I'm looking at the guy that y'all have been looking for all week with the missing hiker.
The person of interest in that missing woman case is at this Chevron gas station on Ashford Dunwoody. The van is here, the dog is here, the red dog, and I saw the man's face, and I've been watching the news, and I know it's him, I know it's him. He's throwing stuff in the dumpster here.
And basically stayed on the phone watching him while officers were responding to take him into custody.
Here comes the cops. Yes. Yes. Police are there? Yes. Oh, they got him now. 2 cruisers pulled up on him. Oh my. They got him.
He was not talking, but we knew that there were answers to some of our questions in the van.
With Hilton now in custody, police look for evidence that links him to the murders of John and Irene Bryant, Cheryl Dunlap, and Meredith Emerson.
We had DeKalb County transport him to our headquarters, which is in DeKalb County, in a conference room in GBI headquarters.
When I first walked into the conference room, Gary was lying on the floor in a fetal position and kept saying that he had multiple sclerosis and he needed an immediate shot of folic acid and just kind of talking crazy. Clay Bridges had actually laid down on the floor with him and talked to him for a few minutes.
Mr. Hilton, my name's Clay Bridges. I'm a special agent with the GBI. Would you be more comfortable in the chair?
I can't sit up.
Okay.
I have vertigo.
You have vertigo? Is that from the multiple sclerosis?
Yes. I'm through talking to you. I'm making those statements. I don't want to be interrogated anymore. Hey, put me back in the handcuffs.
He had a fingernail gouge into his nose, pretty substantial. It looked to be a defensive wound someone else had inflicted on him. His hand was obviously broken. It was swollen. He just stayed quiet. I had learned some things about him. He had one dog in particular that he really cared for that was named Ranger, and he had actually built a shrine to him where he had buried him at. At one point, I told him that I was going to go move Ranger and see how he liked it. He became angry. He became really angry. He cut his eyes up at me and showed me his broken teeth and said, "Just put the needle in my arm."
There was so much in the van. So we got blood transfer pattern that matched John Bryant. So that was huge. We had blood in the van that matched Meredith Emerson. Cheryl Dunlap's car had a flat tire, and there was a bayonet that we recovered. And Florida forensics were able to match that to the puncture in the tire.
Despite the extensive evidence linking Hilton to the 4 murders, police haven't found Meredith Emerson's body. But with Hilton due to face the death penalty, they propose a deal.
They basically came back and said he'll tell you if you take the death penalty off the table. At that point, we knew we had John Bryant in that van. Some boots had Cheryl Dunlap's blood on it. So we knew we had a couple of more bites at the apple of giving him the death penalty, and agreed to take the death penalty off the table for Meredith and recover her body. And he started showing us on a map. He said, yeah, the head will be missing.
When it came time to do the recovery of the body, we started at night. We brought out temporary lighting to set up. We worked throughout the night, did the recovery. Then we came back the next morning at sunrise and processed the scene over again in the daylight. Well, the body was covered with leaves and limbs and debris. Literally, you could be standing a couple of feet away and not know there was a body there. So he had done a very good job of concealing the body. Her head was about a mile from that site, lying near a log, again, covered in leaves.
I mean, is that difficult to do, to take somebody's head off? I've never seen that done. I mean,
all you got to do is keep sewing,
Right.
sewing,
Okay.
sewing, and then get through the joint. It's just like you would, that's what it's made for in the kitchen, to cut up meat.
Right, okay.
I interviewed him about the crime itself, and truthfully, it was the most horrific thing I think I had ever heard, even as a law enforcement officer, watching horror movies, any aspect. It was undoubtedly one of the most devastating gut punches that I have taken.
I didn't kill him for any satisfaction. It was distasteful. It was dreadful. Trust me, it was. Of course, I was able to do it because of my general rage against society.
You know, she was thinking, well, if I can just keep him at bay, you know, just a little bit longer, they're going to find me. They're going to find me. And then to listen to all that and him describe how he took her life, once he was taken away, it all flooded in on me, and I just began to cry. It was nothing I've ever experienced before. Nothing like anything I've ever been around.
At his first trial, Gary Hilton is found guilty for the murder of Meredith Emerson. He's sentenced to 30 years in prison. At a second trial for the murder of Cheryl Dunlap, Hilton is found guilty. He receives the death penalty. At a third trial for the murders of John and Irene Bryant, Hilton is found guilty. He receives a sentence of life imprisonment.
I mean, he's just pure evil. You can see it in his eyes. I've never met anybody that you could literally look in their eyes and see evil, but him, and he is. He's truly evil.
I think when you look at Gary Hilton, you look at his background, I think a lot of his not fitting in was more a reflection of his personality, his lack of coping skills, and this trauma he experienced as a child. I do think once he crossed a line, once he murders Irene and John, I think there is no going back. And I think he would have continued to kill until he was caught.
It was too much to even comprehend how he could be that cruel, that evil, and commit the horrific acts that he did. It's sickening. It makes me sick today, 16 years later, just thinking about it. I'm sick to my stomach.